The elevator doors started closing, and Naira Ose stuck her arm through the gap without thinking. She stepped in, adjusted the visitor badge on her blazer, pressed the button for the 14th floor, took one breath. Then she opened her mouth. 3 separate approval chains, she said to nobody in particular. Gone in the same quarter. Not delayed. Not misrouted. Gone. And not one person above the 5th floor has a satisfying explanation for it. The elevator held 7 people. 6 of them went completely still. Naira did not notice. She was already on her next thought. I have been inside 4 departments this year. 4. And every single time I trace a breakdown back to its source, it goes up. Never down. The people on the floor are doing their jobs. The inconsistency lives in the offices with the corner windows. Someone up there is moving approvals around like furniture, organized, intentional, and very careful not to leave a name on it. A woman in a gray blazer shifted her weight slightly to the left. A man near the back panel let out the quietest breath of his life. The man at the front of the car had not moved. He stood with his back to the door panel, hands clasped behind him, dark coat, no badge, no folder, no phone out. He was looking at the brushed metal wall in front of him the way people look at something they already understand completely. Naira kept going. The thing that gets me is how clean it is. This isn't careless. Whoever structured it knew exactly which approval thresholds trigger mandatory board review, and they kept every transaction just under the line. That's not an accident. That's architecture. Hi viewers, before this story goes any further, I want to ask you something personal. Have you ever been the only person in a room willing to say the thing everyone else already knew but was too afraid to speak out loud? Drop your answer in the comments right now, your story matters here. She shifted her folder from one arm to the other. I would say it straight to whoever is responsible. No politics, no posturing, just sit down, here's what I found, here's what it means, here's what has to change. I'd say it to their face if I ever met them. The elevator slowed. 14th floor. The doors opened. Naira walked out without a backward glance, already thinking about the report she needed to finish before noon. The doors slid shut behind her. For exactly 3 seconds, no one in that car made a sound. Then the woman in the gray blazer turned, slowly, toward the man at the front, the man who had not moved once, whose presence had changed the air in that car the moment he stepped into it, and she whispered it the way people whisper things that have already gone too far. Does she even know who she was just talking to? On the 38th floor, 3 things happened the moment Orion Vale walked into the boardroom. The side conversation stopped. 2 executives who had been leaning over a shared document straightened up as if a current had passed through their spines. A junior analyst near the window closed his laptop before he even realized he'd done it. Orion set nothing on the table. He pulled out his chair, sat, and looked at the room the way a man looks at something he built, not with pride, but with the flat, steady attention of someone checking whether it still works. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He spoke 7 words to open the meeting, and by the time the last one landed, every person in that room understood that the only thing worse than being wrong in front of Orion Vale was wasting his time. That was his world. Not the title. Not the corner office. The weight. The kind of authority that doesn't announce itself because it has never needed to. 12 years of knowing exactly where power lives inside a system, and exactly how to hold it without making noise. 3 floors below, Naira Ose was eating lunch at her desk. Rice she'd packed from home, because the building cafeteria started at $14 and $14 lunches were not part of her math. The math Naira did every month was a different kind, specific, tight, and done with the same steady jaw her mother had taught her to hold level when the numbers were hard. Her mother, Celestine, had been on dialysis 3 times a week for 2 years. The private facility cost more than Naira's rent. The public waitlist was 18 months long. Naira had done the math on that waitlist the day she got the news and crossed the public option off the list without a word to anyone. She paid the private bill. Every month. On time. Which meant the contract mattered. The month-to-month renewal mattered. The job inside this building mattered. Not because she loved it, but because losing it was not in her rotation. She stared at the spreadsheet taped to her corkboard. Duplicate approval codes. Same transaction ID. 2 separate authorization timestamps. 2 different department heads listed, either of whom had signed the original request. She had seen sloppy record-keeping before. This wasn't that. The spacing was too even. The intervals too clean. She traced the routing code that kept reappearing. Not a name, a designation. The kind assigned to an authority that sat above the standard audit trail. She followed it, department by department, quarter by quarter, and every time the trail bent, it bent in the same direction. Executive Division. Naira set her fork down and wrote 4 words at the bottom of her notepad. Missing authority, not absent. She stared at those words for a long time. Then she wrote 2 more. Redirected. Why? Naira submitted the audit request at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning. Standard form, standard language, every required box checked. She attached her preliminary findings, precise, methodical, nothing beyond what she could document. 44th internal request she'd filed since starting this rotation. She hit submit and went back to her coffee. She had no idea that 4 seconds later, a system flag fired on the 38th floor with her name on it. Orion opened her attached file in the back of his car on the way to a meeting he would spend 40% of his attention actually attending. He read it once. Then again. Most reports that crossed his desk were one of 2 things: overclaiming, built to make the writer look sharp, or hedging, padded with qualifiers so that no one could hold the writer accountable. Naira's was neither. Observed pattern, documented sequence, and a single question at the end. Not an accusation. A question. Specific. Clean. Unanswerable without access she didn't currently have. He pulled up her personnel file. Rotational contractor. 8 months. Prior work, forensic financial analysis at a mid-size regulatory firm, left when the firm was restructured. Before that, a university prize in applied statistics. His deputy had flagged her 6 weeks ago for a renewal review and described her in 3 words at the bottom: competent but unremarkable. Orion removed that assessment from the file. He sat with the phone in his hand and looked out the car window at nothing in particular. He thought about the elevator. He had known who she was before she opened her mouth. Her inquiry had appeared on his daily brief 6 days prior. He'd reviewed it and made the choice to let her continue. That was already a decision. But in that elevator, she hadn't been reckless. She'd been accurate. Every word. She said it to a car full of strangers not because she wanted to impress anyone. There was no performance in her voice. But because it needed to be said and she had calculated that someone should say it. That was the part that stayed with him. He made 1 call. Matthias picked up on the 2nd ring. The OSE contractor, Orion said. Expand her system access to level 4 clearance. Effective this morning. A pause. She's rotational, sir. Level 4 is reserved for. Effective this morning. He ended the call. That afternoon at 2:14, Naira's portal refreshed without warning. She looked at the screen. Access level updated, Tier 4, Executive Document Archive. She read it twice. She had 2 pending requests for Tier 3 sitting unanswered for 6 weeks. She had never asked for Tier 4. She didn't know anyone with the direct authority to grant it, or at least, she hadn't thought she did. She sat back in her chair. Why? She said quietly, voice barely above a breath. Would they let me see this? She moved through the archive carefully. 1 layer at a time. Never opening a folder she hadn't logically arrived at first. It took 3 days to see the full shape. What she found was not what she expected. The word she kept trying to apply was corruption, because that was what the visual suggested. Parallel structures. Duplicate records. Approvals appearing twice under different timestamps, filed by different department heads, for the same underlying transaction. She was not a person who trusted the surface. She went deeper. And the deeper she went, the more the picture shifted. The money wasn't going sideways. It was landing in the right accounts. The services were being delivered. The vendors matched. The books balanced. Whatever this structure was, it wasn't taking money out of the system. It was routing decisions through a different pathway, secondary, parallel to the standard chain, invisible to the normal audit trail. She mapped it on paper first. Then in a private spreadsheet she kept entirely offline. The transactions that passed through the secondary route all belonged to the same category: infrastructure maintenance, internal systems, departmental resource allocation. All mid-size. All filed below the threshold that triggers mandatory board review, consistently below it, across 7 consecutive quarters. Too consistent to be coincidence. Whoever built this wasn't sloppy. Every deviation from the standard trail was matched by a corresponding visible entry, just shallow enough that a standard audit wouldn't catch it unless you already knew to look 2 folder levels deep. She was turning the question of why over in her mind when her desk phone rang. Internal line. Extension she didn't recognize. She picked up. "You're looking in the right place." The voice was low, measured, and deliberate in a way that told her it had practiced being careful for a long time. "Just make sure you understand what you're looking at before you decide what to do with it." The line went dead. She held the phone for a moment. Then she turned back to her screen and opened the most recent folder she'd flagged that morning, a contracts subdirectory she hadn't touched yet. The metadata at the top loaded instantly. Last opened, 6:43 a.m. today. She arrived at 8:15. Her Tier 4 access wasn't granted until 2:14 the day before. This file was opened before she ever had access to see it. Opened. And left exactly where her path would lead her. She set both hands flat on the desk. Someone had built her a path. And they hadn't stopped at the door. Orion did not think of it as interference. He thought of it as clarity of information flow. He had not altered a single record. Had not planted a single document. He had ensured that the person with the ability to read the pattern had the access the pattern required. What she concluded would be entirely her own. He reviewed her progress the way he reviewed everything that mattered, at distance, without signal, with complete attention. His deputy Matthias placed the daily access logs on his desk every morning at 7, cross-referenced with her submission timestamps. She was not scattered. She built the map from the structure outward, methodical, layered, each step following logically from the one before. Third day, she found the parallel approval trail. Fourth day, she identified the category pattern, mid-size infrastructure contracts, consistently below board review threshold. Fifth day, she stopped expanding and went deeper on one specific cluster of files. The right cluster. As if she'd understood that breadth wouldn't answer the question. Only depth would. Orion set the summary down and looked out at the city. She was not what he had expected. Competence, he'd anticipated. Her record was clear. What he hadn't anticipated was the quality of her patience. The way she held an open question without forcing it closed. Most people, when they hit something surprising, reach immediately for the explanation that makes it smaller and easier to file. She let it stay surprising while she built more context around it. He could count on one hand the number of people in this building who worked that way. His phone lit up. Matthias. She submitted a cross-department records request through the standard portal, Matthias said. Normally a 3-week queue. Do you want me to clear it? Orion said. Sir, if she notices the turnaround time, then she'll know what it means. A pause. You want her to notice? Orion said nothing. Which, with him, was the answer. He had made a decision about Naira Osei in that elevator, not a personal one, not yet, but a professional one, as clean as any he had ever made. She was the first person inside this building in 4 years to look at the right part of the structure without being led there. When she filed that first audit request, on her own instinct, in the right direction, he had decided. He was going to let her see the full picture. Because in his experience, there were 2 kinds of people in a system like this: Those who found something wrong and immediately calculated what it would cost them personally, and those who found something wrong and kept going anyway. He had spent the last decade surrounding himself with the first kind. They were manageable, predictable, safe. He was tired of safe. That afternoon, Naira opened her notepad to a fresh page and wrote 3 lines. She underlined the last one twice and sat very still, staring at them. Someone is removing obstacles. Why? Someone wants me to find this. For the first time since she stepped inside this building 8 months ago, she understood that she was not working alone. By the end of the second week, Naira had the full picture. Not every detail. There were layers she'd never reach, decisions made in rooms that didn't appear on any floor plan. But she had the shape. The logic. The answer to the question she'd been circling for days. The secondary approval system wasn't protecting private gain. It was protecting the company from itself. She found the original trigger buried 3 levels deep, a board-level internal audit from 4 years ago. Not a fraud finding. A decay finding. Middle management had been approving expenditures that individually fit within their authority, but collectively drained the infrastructure maintenance budget to a level that made a critical system's failure statistically likely. Nobody broke a rule. They made individually rational decisions that combined into something dangerous. Someone saw it coming. And they built a correction. A secondary routing structure, properly funded, properly executed, directing resources exactly where the standard system was failing. The work got done. The buildings held. The outcomes were right. The pathway was wrong. Because it was undisclosed. Unaudited. Operating entirely outside the governance structure the company was legally required to maintain. The intent didn't change the architecture. An approval chain without board visibility is a compliance violation, full stop. Naira sat with that for a long time. She thought about the voice on the phone. Make sure you understand what you're looking at before you decide what to do with it. She understood now. The person who built that system wasn't a thief. They had watched the standard structure fail and moved because waiting for the official channels to correct themselves would have cost more than they were willing to let happen. She understood that impulse. She lived it every month when she looked at her mother's billing statement and chose the private facility over the wait list. But understanding something was not the same as endorsing it. She opened the report template. Placed both hands on the keyboard. Her contract renewal was in 6 weeks. A narrow report would be easy. Flag the surface inconsistencies, stop there, say she was doing her job without fully exposing the structure. Safe enough. Enough to justify a renewal. The cursor blinked. She thought about the access someone had given her. The doors that had opened. The file left waiting at 6:43 in the morning. There was only one coherent reason a person gives access like that. Because they expect you to do something real with it. Her fingers moved. Full findings. Complete mapping. Every routing code, every file path, every timestamp, every deviation from the governance standard. No editorializing. Just the complete, documented truth of what she found, written with the same precision she brought to everything, because anything less would have been its own kind of dishonesty. She read it once. Moved her cursor to the top right corner of the screen. Took one breath. Clicked submit. Nothing happened. That was the part she hadn't planned for. She expected something, even just a holding response, some signal that the report had landed and people were reading it. The portal said, submission received. Under review. And then it just sat there. The same green status bar every morning at 8:16. The same neutral language. The same implied patience requested of her. She did not have patience. She was made of controlled patience, and it was the most exhausting thing about being her. 3 days in, she noticed the first change. Not in the portal. In the building. A senior analyst she had walked past every morning for 8 months. A man who had nodded at her with the mild courtesy of someone who recognized a face but not a name, held the elevator door for her on Thursday morning. Made eye contact. Said nothing else. The next day, a woman from Regulatory Affairs placed a coffee on her desk, set it down carefully, like something with weight behind it, and kept walking without comment. By Friday, she had counted 4 conversations that ended before she reached them. Not hostile. Just contained. The way conversations go when the people having them aren't yet certain how much you know. The building was adjusting around her. She could feel it the way you feel a shift in air pressure, not dramatic, just different. She kept working. Added a 3-page addendum documenting additional routing codes she'd found after filing. Said nothing to anyone. Ate lunch at her desk. Watched the fluorescent light above her head do its usual one-sided flicker. Monday of the second week, her inbox loaded at 8:16. One new item. Sent at 6:44 a.m. from an internal scheduling system she had never interacted with. No sender name. Subject line, a reference number she didn't recognize. The body contained exactly 1 sentence. Meeting scheduled, executive floor. Monday 9 a.m. Reference, OV7714. She stared at it. She knew what those initials stood for. Everyone in this building knew. His name sat at the top of the internal directory in a section so short it had 4 entries, and the 38th floor was the floor where people spoke in lower registers and checked their own reflections before the elevator doors opened. OV. She was a month-to-month contractor with a renewal in 6 weeks. She was not on that list. She read the email 4 times. Then she closed her laptop, gathered her things with the steady calm she used when the situation required her to be more composed than she actually felt, and went home to prepare for the most important Monday morning of her working life. She arrived at 8:52. The 38th floor had a different quality of air. Quieter, not because fewer people worked there, but because the noise that existed had a different register. Lower. More precise. The kind of silence that meant everyone present understood exactly what was at stake in everything they did. Naira was given a chair outside a glass-walled conference room with a frosted interior panel. She sat with her folder in her lap and her hands folded on top of it, the way she had waited her whole life, not passively, but with her full attention turned inward, like someone standing at a closed door who hasn't decided to open it yet. Inside, she could hear voices. Not words. The weight of them. Her report was on the screen. 8 executives sat around a table cut from a single continuous slab of wood. 3 of them had the stillness of people who already knew what the document contained. 2 did not. One of those 2 had gone very quiet in a way that was louder than anything else in the room. The head of internal governance, a careful man named Park who had survived 4 leadership transitions by knowing exactly when to speak, set his glasses on the table. The question before us is whether to proceed with full board disclosure or conduct an internal review under executive privilege prior to. The question, said a voice from the far end of the table, is whether the findings are accurate. Everyone turned. Orion Vale had not moved from his chair. He was looking at the screen. The findings are documented, but the implications for. I didn't ask about the implications. His voice was even. I asked whether the findings are accurate. The room held its breath. Adeyemi, head of compliance, a woman who had filed her own preliminary concerns 6 months ago and been told to wait, said it without hesitation. They are. Orion nodded once. Turned to Park. Then the question is not whether to disclose. It's how and when. After which, we address the governance gap, properly, this time, with board visibility and legal architecture that doesn't require a contract auditor to find it on her own. The quiet man looked at the table. Adeyemi opened her notepad. Orion turned his chair toward the door. Bring her in. The door opened and Naira walked in the way she walked into every room that required something from her, shoulders level, pace controlled, managing the part of herself that wanted to check whether her badge was straight. She took the indicated chair. Set her folder flat on the table. Folded her hands. Orion was directly across from her. No one introduced him. He looked at her for 3 seconds, not assessing. Confirming. The way a person confirms a calculation already run. Why didn't you stop? He said. Quiet. No warmth performed. No coldness either. Just a question shaped like a fact. She didn't hesitate. Because no one else did. He waited. She held the weight. Didn't move to fill it. You understood what the system was protecting? Yes. And you filed the full report anyway. That's the job. It's also your contract renewal. She met his eyes directly. I know what it is. The room was very still. Park had stopped writing. Adeyemi was watching Orion with the expression of someone watching a process finally complete. Naira kept going, not to fill silence, but because this was the part that mattered and she had spent 6 weeks finding the words for it. The system worked, she said. The outcomes were right. I documented all of that. But a fix without oversight is only safe until someone finds it, and the next person who finds it might not have the full picture. They might just see the deviation, act on that alone, blow up something they never understood. She paused. If you didn't want the full report, you shouldn't have opened the doors. Something moved in his expression. Small. Real. A long moment passed. He looked at her the way he had in the elevator, with the full, invisible weight of his attention, the kind that didn't feel like scrutiny so much as being read by someone who already knew most of the words. Then he set both hands flat on the table. The governance structure will be rebuilt. Board visibility, legal architecture, full documentation. Your audit will be the foundation. He looked at her directly. You'll stay. Not a question. Not a command. Something more precise than either, a statement of what he had decided, delivered to the one person whose agreement he appeared, for the first time in a very long time, to actually want. The restructuring was quiet. 3 executives were reassigned in 2 weeks, one to a division where his approval authority covered a much narrower set of decisions, 2 to roles where the word discretion had a completely different meaning. A 4th cleared his office on a Thursday and was gone by Friday morning. No emergency meeting. No press statement. No announcement carefully worded to mean its opposite. Power, when it decides to correct itself, does it quietly. Naira had always suspected that. Now she had seen it. A new oversight framework was drafted over 6 weeks. Properly chartered, properly disclosed, board-level visibility built into every node from the start. Adeyemi led the legal architecture. One rotational auditor was added to the project as a core contributor. Not temporary. Not advisory. Permanent. The word rotational disappeared from Naira's employment file on a Tuesday. She found out from HR, signed the amendment before lunch, and called her mother that night. Celestine picked up on the second ring. The contract came through, Naira said. A pause. I know. How do you know? Because you called before 9 on a Tuesday. You only do that when something real happened. Naira laughed, quiet, sudden, the kind that surprises you. She stood at her kitchen window with the phone pressed to her cheek and looked at the city and felt, for the first time in a long time, the particular lightness of a weight set down and not picked back up. The math that month was easier. She didn't call it a victory. Too loud, too final, more like the end of something than the steadier, quieter thing it actually was. She called it an outcome. Something that happened because of work, not luck. Because she did the job when doing the job cost something. 2 months after the Monday meeting, she was on 38 at 7:30 in the morning, early the way she always preferred the building, when it was quiet and unhurried and still belonged to itself. She poured coffee into the mug she had started keeping on the shared shelf up here. Not because anyone asked her to. Because someone had placed a labeled hook on the shelf one morning and she had made the reasonable decision not to remove it. Orion was already there. He didn't acknowledge her arrival with a greeting. He stood at the window with a coffee of his own, looking at the city the way he looked at most things, fully, and without performing the looking. She poured her coffee. You knew who I was, she said. Not accusing. Finishing a calculation she had carried since the elevator. Before I stepped in. You already knew my name. He looked at the city. Your preliminary inquiry flagged 2 weeks prior. And you let me keep going. Yes. Why? A pause. The city stretched below them, enormous and indifferent, full of its own business. Because the system needed someone who would tell the truth about it regardless of what it cost them, he said. And because that is not something you manufacture. You either find it or you don't. She held her mug with both hands. He turned then, not the way he turned in boardrooms, which was controlled and transactional. He turned the way a person turns towards something they have thought about carefully and decided to face. He looked at her directly, the same way he had in the elevator, in the boardroom. In every moment she had refused to behave the way his world had taught everyone around him to behave. She held his gaze. The city went on doing what cities do. Neither of them moved to leave. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do inside a system isn't to fight it from the outside. It's to walk in through the front door, do the job honestly, and refuse to stop when everything around you is built to make stopping feel reasonable. Because real power doesn't reward courage with fanfare. It doesn't perform gratitude or stage a ceremony. It simply makes room. And that, more than anything, is how you know the recognition is real. If you were Naira, would you have filed the full report and risked everything, or would you have narrowed it to protect yourself? Be honest. Drop your answer in the comments below. I genuinely want to read what you think, and your response might be exactly what someone else in this community needs to hear today. If this story moves something in you, please subscribe right now and turn on the notification bell, because stories about integrity, quiet courage, and the cost of doing the right thing are exactly what this channel is built on. You do not want to miss what is coming next. Share this with someone who needs it. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being part of this community.